Hi, this is Sam Faddis, and this is WKCV LP 103.5 FM, the voice of Keystone College, La Plume, Pennsylvania, the beautiful Endless Mountains of Northeast Pennsylvania. Today what we're going to be talking about is Iran, but specifically what we're going to be talking about is really money and corruption and the regime. We've got folks in power in Tehran who like to talk in terms of piety and religious principle and dedication to the faith, but the reality is a lot more sordid and a lot more tawdry than that. Most of these guys are getting very rich off of what they're doing and what they're doing to the Iranian people. So to help us discuss that, we have with us today maybe the best guy on the planet to illuminate the subject, J.J. Bakhtiari, who is an Iranian patriot, and I don't use the term patriot lightly. This is a guy who doesn't just talk the talk, he walks the walk. He has spent his whole life fighting for a free Iran, quite literally. His grandfather, last prime minister of the late Shah, assassinated by Iranian thugs. JJ himself hunted by those same assassins. Coming to us today from an undisclosed location, and that's not hype or marketing or spin. That's the reality of a guy who has a price on his head. So JJ, without any further ado, welcome. We really appreciate you making the time.
Thank you for having me.
So look, let's start with this, kind of trying to set the stage, if you will, because I don't think in the press on any spectrum that folks do a very good job of really discussing what's actually going on in Tehran. You have this sort of cast of characters, the Ayatollahs, their henchmen, I'll use that term loosely, folks in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps and so forth, that control the country. To what extent do these folks also run the economy of Iran?
Right. So I thought before I answer your questions, please allow me to give you a brief and bona fide synopsis of the Ayatollah regime. It might inform your listeners a little bit better. I believe that it's similar to a celestial Islamic North Korea, and they're desperate for the nuclear bomb. Anyone who believes that the Ayatollahs have halted the nuclear enrichment program for a second is extremely naive, including the Obama administration. Furthermore, I challenge any individual to name a crime committed by the Ayatollahs in the past 4 decades, including terrorism, genocide, human trafficking, and war crimes. Today, men, women, and children have disappeared in Iran, and the families are clueless as to their fate. It's a cliche, but over 90% claim that life is worse than yesterday, and tomorrow will be worse than today. As far as the corruption goes, I can tell you corruption, blackmail, and extortion has spread across the country like a gangrene since the Ayatollah revolution of 1979. From my personal experiences dealing with the Iranian government, I can testify that not a single transaction can take place without corruption. The method is set up by a string of bogus front companies. Ultimately, all roads lead to Khamenei, the leader. In a recent survey, the top 10 most corrupt nations, according to the U.S. News and World Report ranking, puts them fourth after Nigeria, Colombia, and Pakistan. I think that gives you an idea of the level of corruption they are harboring.
Right. So when you're talking about corruption, I mean, let's put some meat on those bones, man. What exactly does that mean? I mean, if I'm doing a deal in Tehran, I have to literally pay somebody off? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, first of all, what you have to do is get to the ministry that you want to deal with. Already, to get to the ministry, you definitely have to pay some people to get an appointment. Once you get there, the ministers are quite frank with you. They tell you that administration and getting things done costs a lot of money, and the money must be paid upfront. And every year, I can assure you, the price goes up and up and up. There was a time that $10,000 meant something to them. Today, they're talking about $100,000 to $150,000, even to look at your proposition. And you're not even guaranteed that it's going to go further. And it's like take it or leave it situation. They have become that greedy and that rich that they don't even consider stuff for lesser amounts. And I can give you one example for of the things that they do is that they set up these bogus financial institutions with the approval of the central bank, advertising, promising higher returns than the national banks. And after a few months, they simply declare themselves bankrupt. And the investigations go nowhere since they were set up by the government in the first place. They never find a culprit, and there are no compensations. And the funds are used to finance the usual suspects like Yemen, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Venezuela, Cuba, and all these wonderful friends that the Ayatollahs have. I would also like to remind the American public that many U.S. soldiers have been killed because of the Ayatollah's funding, training and supplying armaments to terrorists to fight their proxy wars.
So, aside, we've been talking up till now so far about the corruption in terms of bribes, payoffs, graft, whatever terminology you want to use. But let me take a slightly different slant here. The Iranian government is now subject to some pretty strict sanctions, and sales of oil are plummeting. But up until relatively recently, before the sanctions were reinstituted, Iran was selling millions of barrels of oil a day, huge quantities of money coming in. Where's that money go in Iran? Does that money go to the people? Does that money end up in the pockets of the Ayatollahs? What happens to all that cash?
Well, the money basically goes to the IRGC, which is the Revolutionary Guard that which are now on the list of terrorism by the United States. I'm very glad that they are, because that's exactly what kind of operations they lead. And of course, people know the name of a man by the name of Soleimani, who really runs the entire army, IRGC, and the Quds Force. And he really needs a lot of money to set up bases in Syria and to fund his terrorism. And that's where the money is going. There is no new infrastructure going on in Iran. If there's an earthquake, there are floods, and people are homeless, they're just promises, and nothing absolutely happens. And since the sanctions are so heavy, as you said, they were pumping out 3 million barrels, now down to 600,000, and the people who are buying this oil are extremely afraid of the U.S. Therefore, if the price of the oil on the market is $60, these people are getting it at $40. Then there are a bunch of guys that take commission on the $40. So the government really ends up having not a lot of money. And they are extremely desperate. So what has happened is a huge black market. It is unfair to say that there is inflation in Iran. The right terminology is hyperinflation. And thanks to countries like Turkey, that once used to be what I would like to call a normal country, and the current leader is very friendly with the government. So all the supplies are coming in via Turkey, via Qatar, and some other countries. And the other two main culprits in the whole affair that are really taking advantage of Iran, as you can probably guess, are China and Russia. Iran is just losing money. In order to make money, what they've even done, they have sold part of the Caspian Sea. Before 1979, Iran possessed 50% of the Caspian Sea. Now, they're down to 12%. What happened to the rest? Well, they were compensated for that. And where did that money go? There is absolutely no accountability by the government towards the people. There's no transparency. So basically, you're right. They do what they want with the money. And a lot of the money has to be paid to the Hezbollah and Hamas to keep them happy, keep Israel on edge. Because they don't have Israel on edge, then they have a major problem. They can no longer justify the incredible mismanagement and all the theft.
Right. So if I'm hearing you, if you're buying oil from Iran, you're funding Hezbollah, you're funding the Houthis in Yemen, so forth. But you're also putting money directly into the pocket of IRGC Revolutionary Guard Corps generals. Is that right?
That is correct. If Khamenei does not manage to keep them happy, then he's in trouble. His trump in the whole affair is the IRGC. Without them, he is nothing. Okay. And there's even talk that the IRGC will overthrow him, and they would put a man like Soleimani at the head. But as long as he pays them, everything is fine. So the budget, all the budget goes towards them, and the ordinary people are suffering. And as I said, the prices of one example, the price of a chicken in the morning can be $5. The next morning you can go and it can be $8 or $9. And there's absolutely nothing you can do. And if you complain, you're arrested. That is the consequences. I can tell you about another way that the IRGC is making money, and that is that they send trucks to Afghanistan with oil, and in exchange, the Taliban provides them with opium and heroin. Some of the drugs are distributed by the IRGC for domestic consumption, and the rest goes to Turkey for further distribution to Europe. And this brings them about $6 to $8 billion a year. And it also increases the number of drug addicts in Iran, making them passive and a non-threat to the regime.
Right. So let me hit
you
that.
You can see the kind of.
Let me hit that point just for the purposes of emphasis, because this is pretty extraordinary stuff, right? You've got the clerics that run this country who claim to have a lock on piety and a direct channel to God. And these guys are buying drugs and pushing those drugs to your own people, is what I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely, because, people who are addicted to drugs are very unlikely to become rebellious. So the more people that are hooked, the easier it becomes to rule.
So if I'm an IRGC general or any other major figure in the regime and I'm lining my pockets with money in various ways, direct kickbacks, payoffs, all this stuff, where do I put that cash?
Well, the problem that there are many countries, and I'll give you one, which is your neighbor, Canada, which is more than happy to accept the money from these people. And there is absolutely no due diligence done. There's no KYC, know your client. And there are so many family members of these IRGC generals who are living like kings in Canada. And they have managed to obtain citizenship. And it's just bewildering. I don't know how that is done. And this also happens in the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. So, I'm not saying Canada are the only culprits. Australia is another one, Malaysia, the UAE. As long as you have a lot of money, they're happy to provide you with the passports. As you know, unfortunately, there are other countries like Malta and Cyprus that actually sell passports. And these men have bought these passports in case something goes wrong. Just the way the Nazis went to South America, they will also flee the country and go to these countries with the citizenship and tens of millions of dollars in their bank accounts. One of the prime examples was the Rafsanjani family. Although the regime killed them a few months ago, his children have taken billions of dollars to Vancouver in Canada. And it's a known fact. And the Canadian government has done nothing about it. And this is just it makes the people of Iran go mad, the way that the West sometimes collaborates with these Ayatollahs.
Right. Well, this is, I think, a really important point, particularly right now, because we're talking at a juncture in history where the Trump administration's resolve to really hold the line is being tested. We know the Obama administration folded up, and now there's a lot of people that want the Trump administration to back off and basically go that same route. And a lot of that noise is coming from quarters that people think of as being allies. I mean, Macron in France comes to mind as the chief suspect here, the guy who all of a sudden has some deal where he wants to loan the Iranian government $15 billion and this kind of stuff. And I don't think people understand that many of these folks who are claiming that what they're interested in is peace and brotherhood and avoiding a war, what they really want is to go back to business as usual because the Europeans, are actually making a lot of money off of doing business with this regime.
You're absolutely right. Actually, I was about to mention France being one of the main culprits in the EU because I'll give you 4 examples very quickly. The French multinational oil company, the giant Total, the bank Société Générale, the Peugeot car manufacturers, and the Group Accord, which is the French multinational hospitality company, which is the largest in Europe, have invested billions of dollars in Iran. And they were afraid, the French are afraid of losing all this money. And also, you got to think of Macron, the elections are coming up next year, and if he fails to do anything, he is in big trouble because there's a lot of turmoil going on in France as well. They have absolutely no respect for human rights or anything of the sort. They're just looking for their financial interest, and they're trying to broker a deal where they become the main players. So that is what is going on. Germany, the same. And you've got to remember that last year, for example, the year before, President Trump put all these sanctions in place. They were averaging between $5 and $8 billion a year. And that also meant thousands of jobs. So if they halt everything, there's going to be a crisis. There's going to be, many people are going to be unemployed, and $5 to $8 billion is a lot of money for any European country.
Right. So we got a lot of European nations that are always talking in terms of their concern for the Iranian people, and what they're really concerned about is their own pocketbooks. When we've been talking off and on here, we've touched on this, but just to push this a step or two further, you have this Iranian money, IRGC money, whatever officials that bring money and park it in bank accounts and so forth in different places around the world. And I think the popular conception here is that, we're trying to find that money, but it's really hard and it's hidden and it's secretly stashed away someplace. And talking to you, what I get the impression of is that actually the reality is it's not hard to find the money. It's hard to find anybody who has the willingness to actually just go do something about it. I mean, it's not a question of our allies doing their best. It's a question of complicity between our supposed allies and the Iranian regime in many places.
That is right. Actually, unfortunately, I would even say that some European countries will stop you from finding the money because, again, the Ayatollahs would appreciate that. So there's so much quid pro quo going on between the EU and the Ayatollahs, and this is all done behind the scenes. And this is going to continue, in my opinion, until they come to their senses. And the only person that is really making them come to their senses is Mr. Trump. I have not seen any other country, well, Israel is a special case, apart from Israel. The other countries are pretty much happy with what's going on. And we have right now in Iran a situation where you have a man called Mujtaba Khamenei, who is the second son of the current leader, Khamenei. I can compare him a little bit to the famous MBS, Mohammed bin Salman. He has vowed to clean out everything, etc., etc., and has appointed a man who used to be the head of judiciary to clean up corruption. But I think that's pretty much asking someone like El Chapo to become the head of the DEA. So it is just an absolute joke when they say they want to clear up corruption.
So, JJ, we're closing in on probably our time limit here in the not too distant future. You just touched on President Trump and his policy. So here's your chance. You get to talk direct to the President of the United States and tell him what he ought to be doing right now on these kinds of issues at this point in history. What should he do?
I think he should stand firm. He should not negotiate with them because negotiating with them is a farce. They can sign all the paperwork you want. Even the JCPOA that they signed with John Kerry, they have never ceased to try and enrich uranium and find a bomb because they know that is going to be the card that they can hold. They will become untouchable if, God forbid, they ever obtain the bomb. And I also would like the United States to have more cyber attacks on the regime's monetary sector, the military sector, and on the nuclear facilities. I don't think having a war, dropping bombs, will solve the problem. That will be a disaster. But cyber attacks seem to really hurt on the regime, and they're very afraid of it. And I know that the U.S. technology is 1,000 miles ahead of it. So waging war on them that way could possibly rise to civil disobedience. And that, I think, is the only solution for Iran to have a regime change. Although we are still looking for that leader that we cannot find outside the country, because if anyone starts talking within the country, they go to prison, then they kind of disappear. So I think these are the three strategies that Mr. Trump should be very firm on, and the Iranians will suffer. But the regime will suffer even more without all these capabilities.
Yeah, well, the comment's very, very well thought out, and particularly I think your focus on finding a way to resolve this successfully without armed conflict and without sticking the Iranian people in the middle, because God knows that they have suffered enough and they don't need more pain as a consequence of this. JJ, I want to thank you very much for being with us. Glad you joined us. We hope to have you back in the near future, and I want to thank everybody for listening, and we'll talk to you next time on Ground Truth.